Okay, in this video we're going to take a look at exponential growth and decay. So as a reminder, here is our equation. A, remember, is where it starts, which is when x is 0. And B is what we are doing to our equation. So it's that ratio. So if we're multiplying it by something, multiplying or dividing. So for example, if we look here, our exponential growth is going to be when our B value is greater than 1 is when we grow. And when it's between 0 and 1 is when it's a decay. So you're looking at that number that has the x as the exponent. So in this problem, 2 is my number that has the x, so 2 is bigger than 1, which means this is a growth. Where 1/2 is the part that has the x, so now this is a decay. So that is how we find it and how we determine if it is a growth or a decay. So let's go to our word problem. So if you remember in class yesterday, we have two equations really here, 1 plus r raised to the t, and then we also have our 1 minus r raised to the t. So we use these two equations anytime we see a percent symbol in our problem, but we do not see the word compound. Now remember that r value, we have to always convert it to a decimal. So for example, if it was like 2.37%, as a decimal, that's going to be 0.0237. And this would be the r value that we put into our equation. So even though there's a decimal right here, we have to make sure we make that conversion. So let's just look at a problem. So we're investing money at $5,000 at 9%. So here is our percent. So we know we have to use that. And because we're investing money, we're adding. So our formula is a times 1 plus r raised to the t. So our a is our start, which we start with $5,000. 1 plus my rate is going to be 0.09 when I convert that, and I'm doing it for 10 years. So all we need to do is now type that into our calculator, and when we do that, we end up with $11,836.82. When we're investing money or doing anything with money in our problems, we're always going to round to the hundreds because we can have cents. So that's an addition problem. For a subtraction problem, when we buy a car, remember our value depreciates, which means the value of the car goes down. So again, we see that percent, and so we know that we have to use that formula, but because it's depreciating, we're going to subtract our r value instead of add it. So we start with 20,000. And then we have 1 minus, and then 0.22 would be our rate after 8 years. And then when we type that in the calculator, we get $2,740.23. So that is when we are either increasing or decreasing with a percentage rate. Okay, so now when we look at this equation, this is when we're multiplying exponentially. So this is when we do not see a percent, but instead we see the words double or triple or something to that effect, like something is happening to whatever we're starting with. So our doubling and our tripling is our b value, and then our a is what we start with again. So let's look at one of those kind of problems. So we have a sample that doubles every 30 minutes. Your sample starts with 200, and we want to know how much we have after 4 hours. So notice again, we don't see a percentage sign. So that's how I know I have to use this formula. So I start with 200, and then I am doubling, so that b value is 2. And then you have to be careful. This is every 30 minutes for 4 hours. So there's actually 230 minutes in 1 hour, but then I need to do it for 4 hours. So the number of times I do it is actually 8. So my exponent is going to be 8 there. And when we type that in our calculator, we get 51,200 milligrams as our final answer. And then the last style of question is when we compound interest. So if you recall, this is our formula that we talked about in class. P is going to be our principal. R is still our rate, T is still our time. So the N is the new piece, and that's when we see this word compounded. So compounded when we say quarterly, for example. Quarterly would be 4, monthly would be 12, weekly is 52, etc. So that, when you see that word compound in your problem, that's how you know you use this formula. And because it's interest, we're always gaining money, so it's always going to be a plus sign right there. So if we look at this problem, I'm depositing 9,000, so that's how much I start with. And, it's paying 1.46%, so here's that percent. But the reason we don't use the very first formula that we talked about is because it says this word compounded. So now we have to use that new formula. So we have 1 plus my rate. If I take 1.46 and I move that decimal 2 spots, I'm at 0.0146. Quarterly means 4, so it's over 4, and then I raise it to the N times T, which is 4 times my time is 3. And then when I type that into my calculator, I end up getting, it says, let's see here, $9,402.21. So that's how much money we will end up with. So that's exponential growth and decay with our application problems.